I should have known. That's the sentence I keep coming back to every morning when I wake up in this apartment that costs me $400 a month instead of the $4,000 I used to spend in Manhattan. I should have known. Not because I'm a stupid man. I spent 50 years not being a stupid man. 50 years reading balance sheets, walking away from bad deals, sniffing out fraud before it had a chance to breathe. But when Iris Fernandez sat across from me in that glass-walled cafe in Makati and started talking about diversified emerging market instruments with a smile that could make a man forget his own name, I stopped being that careful man. I became something else, something I'm still ashamed to say out loud. I became the fool, and I didn't just lose my own money. That I could have lived with. At 73, I could have built something back, maybe, or at least gone quiet into retirement with whatever was left of my dignity. But I convinced other people to trust her, my friends, people who had known me for decades, people who believed in my judgment the way you believe in gravity, not because they tested it, but because it had never once let them down. I pulled them in. I vouched for Iris Fernandez with my full name and my full reputation, and she used everything I gave her to take everything they had. $1.2 million of other people's money, gone. In one night, the platform disappeared, the accounts froze, the statements turned to ash. And I sat in my hotel room in Makati at 2 a.m, staring at a blank screen, trying to understand how a man who had built a career on knowing better had ended up here. This is that story. I'm not telling it for sympathy. I'm telling it because somebody out there right now is sitting across from their own version of Iris, and they're feeling exactly what I felt, that warm, slow certainty that this time, finally, they've found something real, something true, something worth believing in, and I need them to hear what happened to me before it happens to them. My name is Forrest Lincoln. I'm 73 years old. I was born in Queens, New York, and I spent the better part of 5 decades in the investment world, private equity, venture capital, a decade of running my own fund. I retired with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, more than enough if I was careful, and I had always been careful. That was my identity. Careful Forrest. Forrest who reads the fine print. Forrest who doesn't sign anything without sleeping on it for a week. My late wife Eleanor used to joke that I trusted no one, and she wasn't entirely wrong. She passed in 2019, and the grief nearly finished me. 3 years I spent rattling around our apartment on the Upper West Side, going to dinner parties I didn't want to attend, talking to financial contacts who still looked at me the way you look, at a man carrying something too heavy for his own good. I needed to go somewhere. Not because I was running away. I told myself that. I was going somewhere new, somewhere warm, somewhere I could think without the weight of 40 years of shared memories pressing down on every room I walked into. In the fall of 2021, I booked a one-way ticket to Manila. I didn't know anything about the Philippines except that it was warm and relatively affordable and that several other retired Americans I'd connected with online had found a second life there. I landed in Manila, spent a few weeks adjusting, then moved to Makati, which is the financial district, the part of Manila that looks like it could almost be a mid-tier American city if you squint and ignore the traffic and the noise and the heat that hits you like a wall the moment you step. Outside, I rented a serviced apartment, started exploring, and found a rhythm quickly enough. Morning walks, coffee at a place near Ayala Avenue, reading, writing in a journal I'd promised myself I'd keep and mostly didn't. And then one morning in late October 2021, a woman sat down at the table next to mine, opened a laptop, ordered an Americano, and started talking on the phone about asset allocation in a way that made me glance over without meaning to. Her name was Iris Fernandez. She introduced herself about 40 minutes later when she caught me looking at a graph she had open on her screen, yield curves for a Southeast Asian bond fund, and I recognized the shape of them because I'd looked at curves like that for 30 years. "You know what that is?" she said. It wasn't a question. "You've been reading it upside down for the last 5 minutes. I told her I had, and she laughed, and we talked for 2 hours. She was 38 years old, Filipino, born and raised in Makati. She had studied finance at the University of the Philippines and done a postgraduate program in Singapore. She worked as an investment advisor independent, she said, not tied to any single institution, managing portfolios for high net worth clients across Southeast Asia. She was articulate and quick, and she knew the vocabulary in a way that a person cannot fake if they don't actually understand the underlying concepts. That was what got me. Not her looks, though she was undeniably a beautiful woman. It was the way she talked about risk-adjusted returns and liquidity premiums with the casual ease of someone who had spent years inside that world. It felt like meeting a colleague. We met for coffee again 3 days later, and then again. And then she mentioned, almost as an aside, that she managed a platform, a private investment vehicle she had developed for a small group of preferred clients. It wasn't something she advertised. It was invitation only. The returns were strong because the strategy was unconventional, a blend of Philippine sovereign bonds, regional real estate investment instruments, and what she described as a proprietary arbitrage model she developed during her time in Singapore. She wasn't recruiting me, she was just telling me about it. And I, the man who had spent 50 years being careful, said, "Tell me more. I want to be clear about something. I did due diligence, or I believed I did. I asked for documentation, and she provided it in corporation papers for the advisory firm, a regulatory filing number from the SEC Philippines, client testimonials in writing. I looked at the platform interface she gave me access to, a clean, professional dashboard showing account performance, transaction history, yield breakdowns by asset class. I asked her technical questions designed to trip up someone who didn't actually know what they were talking about, and she answered every one of them correctly. I asked about liquidity, and she explained the lockup periods clearly. I asked about counterparty risk, and she described mitigation strategies that made sense. I asked about her existing clients, and she gave me names I could not verify, but that she delivered with total confidence. Everything felt right. Not just emotionally right, analytically right. And that is the thing that haunts me most. Because I prided myself on knowing the difference between something that felt right and something that was right. And she fooled both versions of me. I transferred $50,000 in January of 2022, a test amount, conservative, the kind of amount I wouldn't lose sleep over if it disappeared. Over the next 3 months, the platform showed steady growth, not dramatic, not the kind of returns that should trigger alarm bells, but consistent, credible, the kind of performance that fits a well-managed mid-risk portfolio. 8% annualized, roughly. In February, she messaged me to say one of the bond tranches had matured early and my account had been credited. I logged in. It was there. I requested a small withdrawal, $5,000, just to confirm the mechanism worked. The money arrived in my U.S. account within 5 business days. That was the moment. That was when I stopped being careful, Forrest, and became something else, because the money came back. And when the money comes back, the part of your brain that was asking questions goes quiet. By April of 2022, I had put in $180,000. By July, $310,000. By December, I was at $480,000. The platform kept performing. Iris kept communicating, not aggressively, not in a way that felt like management. She'd send me quarterly summaries with detailed breakdowns. She'd call occasionally to discuss market conditions in the region, to ask what I thought about a particular move she was considering for the portfolio. She asked for my opinion. She deferred to my experience on certain structural questions. That dynamic, her treating me as a peer, a collaborator, not just a client, kept me engaged in a way that pure performance alone might not have. I felt respected. I felt relevant. After 3 years of retirement and grief and quiet uselessness, I felt like I mattered again. And I hate saying that because it reveals exactly how she got me. She found the wound, and she pressed on it gently, over and over, until I stopped noticing the pressure. I want to say something about Iris as a person, because this is not a story about a cartoon villain. She was warm in a way that felt genuine. She asked about Eleanor once. Early on, I'd mentioned my wife in passing, and she didn't push, just nodded and said, "She sounds like she was important." That was it. She didn't try to fill that space with reassurance or false comfort. She just acknowledged it and moved on, and that restraint was somehow more affecting than any amount of sympathy would have been. There were times over those 2 years when I wondered what it would mean if our relationship were something more than professional. I am not proud of that. I was a 72-year-old man, grieving and lonely and far from home, and she was kind and brilliant and present, and the heart does not always ask permission before it wants something. I never acted on it. I never said anything. But I know now that the emotional warmth she offered me, that feeling of being understood, of being valued, was part of the system. Not the whole of it, but part. The first person I brought in was my college friend Theodore Marsh. We'd known each other since 1971. He was retired, living in Florida, managing a modest portfolio on his own and not doing particularly well. I told him about Iris's platform in March of 2022, sent him the documentation she had provided me, walked him through the interface. "Forrest," he said, "you've spent 50 years telling me where to put my money, and I've been too stubborn to listen. I'm listening now." He put in $200,000. The platform showed him the same steady growth mine showed me. He was delighted. He told his son-in-law, a man named Patrick, who put in $85,000. Theodore also told a woman from his Florida circle, a widow named Helen, who put in $150,000. I had not solicited any of these people, but I had, through my own enthusiasm, created the conditions for them to come in, and I had vouched for every one of them with the full weight of my name. Over the next several months, more people came. A former colleague of mine, a man I had worked with in the 90s named Chester Webb, put in $180,000. My accountant, a man who had managed my taxes for 15 years, a man who trusted my financial instincts, implicitly invested $95,000. A neighbor from my old building in New York, a retired judge named Sylvester Okafor, put in $220,000. By the fall of 2023, I had become, without intending to, the primary source of referrals for Iris Fernandez's investment platform. I was not compensated for this. I want that to be clear. I did not profit from bringing people in. I did it because I believed in what I had invested in, because I had watched my own money grow for 20 months and seen the withdrawals arrive reliably, because I thought I was giving people something valuable, because that is what a trusted friend does when he finds something good. He shares it. The last time I transferred money to the platform was November 12, 2023. I brought my total to $520,000. I remember the date because I logged in that morning to make the transfer and sent Iris a message. "Final tranche. Feels like closing a deal." She replied within an hour, "This is just the beginning, Forrest." And I believed her. I sat back in my chair in my Makati apartment and felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely good, like I had found my footing again after years of sliding, like the version of me that understood money and could still make it work was still alive somewhere, and Iris had helped me find him. November 18th, 2023. That's the night it ended. I logged into the platform at around 9 in the evening to check something, a routine thing, just a habit I'd developed of reviewing the dashboard after dinner. The page didn't load. I refreshed. Nothing. I tried a different browser. Nothing. I checked the URL, typed it manually in case I had a bad bookmark. Nothing. I waited 20 minutes and tried again. Still nothing. I told myself it was a server issue. Platforms have outages. This happened. I sent Iris a message. "Platform seems to be down, just flagging." I put my phone down and watched television for an hour, and then checked again, still down. I messaged again. "Iris, please let me know when you see this." I went to bed, not alarmed, just mildly concerned in the way you are concerned when a flight is slightly delayed. These things resolve. I had no reason to think they wouldn't. I woke at 5 in the morning to no reply. By 7, I had messaged 3 more times. By 8, I was calling her phone, which rang twice and went to voicemail. I left a message calm, measured, the voice of a man who was not yet afraid. By 9, I was calling again. Voicemail. By 10, I was calling every 5 minutes and feeling the cold thing start to move through my chest. By noon, the platform URL had been taken down entirely, not unreachable, not errored, but gone, as if it had never existed. The domain returned a blank page. Her email bounced. Her phone went straight to voicemail without ringing. By 3 in the afternoon, I was sitting on my balcony in Makati, 73 years old, looking at the skyline of a city that had given me back something I'd thought I'd lost, and understanding slowly the way a very cold thing moves that I had been robbed. Not in a way I could prove yet, not in a way I could even fully comprehend yet, but I knew. The part of me that had spent 50 years in finance, the part that had gone quiet for 2 years while Iris fed it the things it wanted to see, woke back up in that moment and told me plainly, it's gone. All of it. Every dollar. Every statement. Every yield breakdown and quarterly report and transaction confirmation. All of it was fiction. And you built it. You helped her build it, with your name and your trust and your utter, catastrophic willingness to believe. I called Theodore first. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear from his voice that he already knew. His son-in-law Patrick had called him an hour before. Theodore didn't say anything for a long moment when I finished telling him what I'd found. Then he said, very quietly, I told my wife this was a sure thing, Forrest. I told Barbara this was the safest money I'd ever put away, and I had nothing to say, nothing that would make any of it less true or less painful. I said, I'm sorry, Theodore, and it was the most inadequate sentence I had ever spoken in my life. His $200,000 was gone. Patrick's $85,000 was gone. Helen's $150,000. Chester Webb's $180,000. My accountant's $95,000. Sylvester Okafor's $220,000. My $520,000. All of it gone in a single night when someone somewhere pressed a button and erased 2 years of a very carefully maintained illusion. The total loss across everyone I had referred was $1.2 million, plus my own $500,000. Nearly $1.75 million, destroyed in a night that I had gone to bed thinking was just another quiet evening in Makati. I spent the next 3 days doing the things you do when you're trying to find a door in a room that has no doors. I contacted the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission and filed a complaint. The registration number Iris had given me turned out to be a real number belonging to a legitimate advisory firm that had never heard of her and had no record of any partnership. She had stolen it. The incorporation papers she had shown me were forgeries, good enough forgeries that I hadn't thought to verify them at the source. I went to the address listed on her business card, a real address in Makati, a shared office building I had once visited, and found a different company occupying the space. The receptionist there told me the previous tenant had vacated 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before the platform disappeared. She had been planning the exit while I was telling her that my final transfer felt like closing a deal. While I was thinking this was just the beginning, a friend connected me with a fraud attorney in Manila, a sharp woman named Dolores who was not surprised by anything I told her. She sat across from me in her office and listened to the whole story with the patient expression of someone who has heard it many times before. When I finished, she said, Mr. Lincoln, you were in a Ponzi scheme, a sophisticated one, designed specifically for credible, experienced investors. The early withdrawals were paid with later investor funds. The statements were fabricated. The regulatory number was stolen. This is a pattern we see with some regularity. I asked her what my chances of recovery were. She looked at me for a moment and said, realistically, very low. These operations move money offshore quickly and efficiently. The operator is almost certainly out of the country. She paused. But we will try. I am still trying. 14 months later, I am still trying. The Philippine authorities opened an investigation. Interpol was notified. Nothing has been found. No one has been arrested. Iris Fernandez, if that was even her real name, has vanished as completely as the platform she built. The fraud attorney is still working the case, billing by the hour, which is its own kind of ongoing loss that I absorb because the alternative, giving up, feels like something I cannot do to the people who trusted me. Theodore and I still talk. He doesn't blame me, or says he doesn't, and I believe him enough to keep the friendship alive, though it sits differently now, quieter, more careful, both of us aware of the thing we don't say. His wife Barbara has not spoken to me since November of 2023. I understand that. I do not have the right to ask her for more than that. Chester Webb sent me a letter in January of 2024 that I have read many times. It was not an angry letter. It was something worse. It was a letter from a man who was trying very hard to be gracious and not quite managing it, and every careful sentence was a small reminder of what my failure of judgment had cost him. My accountant, his name is Gerald Porter, and I owe him that. The dignity of being named lost half of what he had saved outside of his retirement accounts. He is still working. He is 66 years old and he is still working because of a decision I encouraged him to make. That is the weight I carry every morning when I get up. I think about the early withdrawal constantly. The $5,000 I pulled out in April of 2022, the test that passed, the proof of concept that turned off my caution. That withdrawal was the mechanism of the trap. She expected it. She planned for it. Every Ponzi operation knows that the first thing a sophisticated investor does is test the exit. So she made the exit work, cleanly and quickly, because she needed me to become a believer, and not just a believer, but a recruiter. I was more valuable to her as an evangelist than as a simple victim. My 50 years of credibility were worth more than my $500,000. She used me to access the people who trusted me, and the people who trusted me had collectively far more to lose than I did. I was the key that unlocked the vault, and I handed myself over willingly because she had convinced me that I was the one doing the locking. The thing that broke me, not the money, not the legal process, not even the conversations with Theodore and Chester and Gerald, was a phone call I received in December of 2023 from Sylvester Okafor. Sylvester is 71 years old. He was a federal judge for 20 years. He is one of the most measured, precise, intellectually rigorous men I have ever known. He called me at 8 in the morning and asked me, very calmly, whether I had done any independent verification of the regulatory filings Iris had provided. I said that I had checked the registration number. He said, "Did you call the SEC directly to verify it?" And the answer was no. I had checked that the number existed on the SEC website. I had not called to confirm it belonged to her. Sylvester said, "Neither did I. I relied on your assessment." He said it without accusation, purely factual, but I felt it in a way I had not felt anything in years. He relied on my assessment. Sylvester Okafor, who had spent 20 years on the federal bench evaluating evidence and detecting deception, had set aside his own considerable judgment because I, Forrest Lincoln, had told him this was solid. $220,000 of his money, gone because I didn't make one phone call. I think about why I didn't make that call. I know the answer, even though it's ugly. I didn't make the call because by the time I was giving referrals, I had already invested over $300,000 and I had already decided it was real. I had a vested interest in it being real. If I called the SEC and found a discrepancy, I would have to confront not just the possibility of fraud, but the certainty that I had already lost $300,000. So instead, I did what human beings do when reality threatens something we need to believe. I didn't look too closely. I gathered the evidence that confirmed what I wanted to see, and I walked away from the evidence that might have broken the story. I am a man who spent 50 years warning other people about confirmation bias, and I fell into it completely. Because I was lonely and I wanted to be relevant again, and Iris Fernandez had given me back a version of myself that I thought I'd buried with Eleanor. I left Makati in February of 2024. I couldn't stay. The city had become something else, every coffee shop a reminder of where this started, every glass-walled building a ghost of the place where she had caught me reading her graph upside down and said, "You know what that is." I moved to a small town in the northern Philippines, which maybe sounds strange, but it was the most affordable place I could find that felt livable, and my resources are not what they were. I live carefully now, very carefully, Not from fear, but from necessity. My retirement nest egg is substantially diminished. I am not destitute. I had assets outside what Iris managed, and I am not a man without resources, but I am a different kind of comfortable than I was, and the difference is made of other people's losses as much as my own. I don't hate her. I know that sounds like something a man says to sound evolved, but it's not performance. I've thought about it enough to know what I feel, and what I feel is something more exhausting than hate. I feel the weight of having been precisely wrong in the most consequential possible way. I feel the particular shame of a man who has built his identity on competence and experienced its complete collapse. Hate would be easier. Hate would give me somewhere to put it. What I have instead is a permanent low-grade grief about the kind of man I turned out to be when the pressure was the right kind of soft. If I could sit across from Iris Fernandez right now, wherever she is, whatever her real name is, whatever version of this she is running on some other man in some other city, I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't accuse. I would ask her one question. I would ask, when did you decide I was the one? Was it that first morning at the cafe, when I started reading your graph? Or had you done this enough times that you could recognize, from a distance, the particular posture of a man who needed to feel useful? Because I have thought about it for over a year, and I still can't decide whether I was specifically chosen or whether I was simply the fool who happened to be sitting closest when you needed one. Either answer is its own kind of devastation. What I know for certain is this. I failed at the most basic level. I am a man who spent 50 years telling other people not to trust without verification, and I trusted without verifying because a beautiful woman treated me like a peer and the platform paid out once, and the grief of Eleanor's death had left me hungry for something I couldn't quite name. All of those things are true simultaneously. The investment analysis failure and the emotional vulnerability and the loneliness and the confirmation bias, they were all there at once, braided together, and Iris Fernandez pulled on exactly the right threads at exactly the right time. That is what makes her terrifying. Not that she was cruel, that she was patient, that she understood, probably before I did, what I was missing and how to make herself look like the thing that filled it. My fraud attorney called me last month with an update that was not quite an update. She said a similar case had surfaced in Singapore, same pattern, different name, different platform, same outcome, and she was sharing information with investigators there. Maybe something comes of it. Probably nothing comes of it. The money is gone. The people I hurt are trying to rebuild, and all I can do is answer their calls and tell them the truth, and not ask them to forgive me on any timeline other than their own. I am writing this from a small veranda in the northern Philippines, looking at mountains that don't care about any of this, which is something I find genuinely comforting. I came here for the warmth and the cost and the quiet, and it turns out those things are still available even after everything else was taken. I am not okay. I want to be honest about that. 73 years old, and I am not okay in a way that I think will probably be with me for whatever time is left, but I am awake. Whatever Iris put me to sleep with for those 2 years, I am awake from it now, and the waking is painful, but it is real, and real is the thing I should have been protecting all along. If you are reading this and you are somewhere in the middle of something that feels like what I described, the warmth, the credibility, the returns that come back when you test them, the sense of finally having found something true, please stop. Please make the call I didn't make. Call the regulator directly, not through a link she provides, not through a number she gives you, but independently, from a source you found yourself. Ask someone who has nothing to gain from the answer. Sleep on it longer than feels necessary. And if the person on the other side of the desk is making you feel special, feel relevant, feel like you found a colleague who finally understands you, please know that is not a reason to trust. It might be the best reason not to, because the most dangerous trap is not the one built out of greed. It's the one built out of the thing you were starving for before you even knew you were hungry. I should have known, but I didn't, and the rest of my life is the shape that failure made.